Thank you for hosting me today, and yeah, I want to thank the Heavybit team for giving us the space, serverless, of course, for hosting the meetup, and all of you guys for showing up. My talk isn't going to be as technical as Chiradeep's, which was very, very good, but hopefully it'll get you guys excited about serverless technology, or at least wanting to try it out. So my talk is titled "The Front End is the New Backend," and that might be a little bit clickbaity, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, basically, what I meant by that is, you guys will see. So, just a little bit about me. My name is Kukic. I work as a developer evangelist at Auth0, which is a authentication as a service startup company. And if you guys actually entered the raffle and logged in, you guys logged in with the Auth0 login box. So I don't have to explain anything else there. I work as a dev evangelist. I go to events like this, try to get people excited about Auth0 and also Webtask, our serverless framework. And you can find me on Twitter at CookicAuto. So I wanted to start this talk with a premise, and that is that servers have become commoditized. And what I mean by this is, in the past, when at least when I was first, building applications, and we called them websites back then, but I cared about the servers that I, stood up. I gave them cool nicknames. I cared about all the software I installed on them, managed them properly, hopefully, and it was a much more personal connection that you had with your servers, with your infrastructure. Now, thanks to like Docker and like Kubernetes, servers, you just write a script, your configuration, throw it out there, and you don't care how your servers are managed. They just work, which is really great, but also it's taken that personal aspect out of servers. And we've gotten to the point where we basically don't even need servers anymore. And this talk is really about serverless computing and how we got there, why we're there, and why you guys should be excited. So, before I get into all of the merits and all of the reasons you should be using serverless, in your applications, in your startups, let's do a quick history lesson to let us know where we were and how we got to serverless and why it's so exciting. So to start it off, back in the day when you wanted to build an application, when you wanted to, launch a startup, you had to go out there and buy your own servers, whether it was renting them from a server farm or, setting up your business in your parents' garage. To get connectivity, you needed some network engineering experience. You needed to know a lot about infrastructure to get your app up and running. And this was, very cost prohibitive. Like, I just want to write code, and I don't care where it's hosted. I just want it to work. And owning my own servers, it was a non-starter for me. And I'm sure for a lot of other people, it was a challenge, especially if you don't have networking experience and if you come from like a computer science background. You just want to write cool applications and have fun and not worry about uptime and SSL certs and all of the fun stuff that goes into managing servers. So companies realized that people don't want to own their own servers, so they started offering, renting servers. So, big companies like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they let you rent a server for, minimal cost and you could get your application up and running in no time. You still had to do all of the infrastructure work of, installing the frameworks you needed, all of the extensions and stuff like that, but you didn't have to have a big upfront investment in a server to be up and running. So you could rent a server. If it didn't work out, kill it, start up another one. So we basically moved everything to the cloud. Well, I mean, even though we moved we stopped owning the hardware, we still had to manage a lot of the software aspects of it. And, the big guys again realized that there's an opportunity there. They had the data saying that, this number of customers are using, Python 1. Whatever, and they could create standard environments that we could deploy our applications at, and they called it platform as a service. And examples of that is like Google App Engine, or to a smaller extent Amazon's Elastic Beanstalk, where you basically just bundle up your application, send it to them. They'll provision the servers, they'll manage all the software, or all the hardware and software elements for you, scale it up and down. It'll cost you more, but you don't really need DevOps anymore. You could just write code and deploy your applications, which was a step in the right direction. It was a little bit more expensive than just renting out a server, like spinning up an EC2 instance and doing everything yourself, but it saved you a whole lot of headache in the process. So while we were building while we were going through this transformation as engineers and as developers and as entrepreneurs, others realized that there was an opportunity here, that they could build software. They could focus on just one thing, and one thing really well. So like Auth0, we do authentication, and we try to provide the best authorization and authentication service around. Twilio does really great with messaging, SendGrid with emails, and I could name hundreds of different SaaS companies. But these companies realized that now that the cost of developing applications is so cheap, if they could offer a service that you as a developer wouldn't have to build, because it would take you an X amount of time, X amount of dev cycles, if you could just purchase their software, integrate it in your product, you would be able to get to market a lot faster. They would be able to make a business out of it. And that's kind of how software as a service was born, and why I included in the discussion on how serverless came to be. And then finally, we have server as a service, serverless, microservices, cloud functions, functions as a service, and there's probably 100 other names you can call it. And it's a very confusing name. Every time I try to mention serverless to someone, whether it's my developer friends or just my business friends, they're like, well, what does that mean? Are there no servers? Is it just is there no processing done on the back end? What does it exactly mean? And I have a couple of different definitions for it, but basically it's someone else's servers. It's platform as a service, but minimized and made for developers. So if you remember that I mentioned platform as a service, you can deploy your application, but it's more expensive than actually just setting up your own EC2 instance or Google Cloud container. With serverless and all of the big, serverless technology providers, whether it's Lambda or, Google Cloud Functions, Webtask, you can deploy your application, you can deploy your code, and you don't get charged for it just sitting there idly. You're only charged when your application is in use. Whenever you get hit, whenever somebody, access that serverless function, whether it's an endpoint or an entire application, then you're charged for that functionality. So I was on Twitter a couple weeks ago and just kind of looking up what people were talking, discussing serverless. And this guy, Rob, he said, what serverless means to him is auto scale and no idle costs. So, and I think that's true of all of the major serverless providers these days. You're not charged to deploy your code because your applications, typically, if you're building serverless applications, you're building, small bits and pieces of core functionality that can live independently and that can stand on their own, and they don't take up a whole lot of resources. So, you're not going to have idle costs, and the big benefit of that is they're going to auto scale. So if you get a burst of activity, if you get 10,000 requests a second, Amazon is going to be able to auto scale your serverless function, serve all of those requests, and then sure, they'll charge you for it, but it's going to be much lower than if you were to auto scale like an EC2 instance or similar technologies. And when I talk to my business friends about when I try to explain serverless to them, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Rick and Morty, but there's this episode where they introduced this character, a Meeseek, which essentially, when you want something done, something simple, you call a Meeseek, he does it, and then he disappears. That's like their whole purpose, to do a simple task and disappear. So that's kind of how I explain serverless to my less technical friends. They're pieces of functionality, pieces of code that work, that do an intended function, and as soon as they're done, they go away. And you can forget about them, but you have them at the ready when they're needed, when you call upon them. So a couple examples of serverless frameworks. Webtask is the Auth0 serverless framework, which I'll talk a little bit in depth with you guys today. Google Cloud Functions and Firebase Cloud Functions, they kind of launched earlier this year, and they just rebranded to Firebase Cloud Functions. If you guys are using the Firebase platform, that gives you kind of really good synergy there. AWS Lambda, obviously the big dog in the serverless space, and definitely the incumbent. And this last one in bold, SaaS applications. I would count SaaS applications as somewhat of serverless applications, because you don't care how the SaaS application that you're using works. You just care that when you make a request to the Twilio API, it sends that text message, or when you make a request to Auth0 to log a user in, that they get logged in properly. You don't care where it's hosted, how it's hosted, who's managing it. You just care that it works, and it works, consistently and without fail. And with that, I would like to introduce you guys to webtask.io, which is kind of a side project at Auth0. Since at Auth0 we build authentication products, we build a pipeline for SaaS companies to simplify their authentication and authorization aspects, and almost every customer we have has a unique use case. So rather than trying to build a custom solution for everyone, we just take care of the login, the logout, and issuing like JSON Web Tokens or sessions. Everything in the middle, we have a rules engine that's built on Webtask that allows each customer to customize what happens. Do you kick off a multi-factor authentication session? Do you force the user to change their password because it's been 90 days and they need to change it? Or there's thousands of different use cases, and we give our customers the flexibility to customize their authentication workflow to work for them. And Webtask, our customers really loved it so much that we just thought, hey, let's throw this out there and let's see what other people can use it, what they do with it, because it's really simple. And our tagline there is all you need is code. And I hope to show you that is true, that just by writing a little bit of code, you can have your application running. You don't have to worry about managing it, where it's hosted, how it's hosted. Is it going to work? It just should. So how do Webtasks work? They're basically Node.js containers, and you can write any valid Node.js JavaScript code in ES5 or ES6 syntax, and you can use any of the npm modules. So you can import Express if you wanted to and make a whole application out of it, or you could just write one simple function to do like gather an email, or send an email out. Do something really simple, or you can use it for more complex cases. It really just depends on you. We give you that flexibility. And to get started, just like our big selling point, or the big thing that I like about Webtask is you can be up and running in like 10 seconds. You just install the Webtask CLI by running npm install wt-cli. Much like like with Lambda, for example, if you guys have used it without serverless, it could be a pain to set up. You have to set up the serverless. You have to write the code. You have to first write the function, deploy it to Lambda, set up API gateway, set up all the permissions, and it could be tiresome. And especially if you haven't done it before, the barrier to entry is a little bit higher. So a framework like serverless, they make it super simple. You can just install their CLI and be up and running quickly. But with Webtask, we kind of have that built in. Once you have the CLI installed, you run WT in it to create your profile. So you just register with like your email address or a phone number, and then you write your code, and that's really it. You could write your code locally and deploy it to Webtask, or if you run this WT edit command, it's actually going to bring up the online editor that we built that allows you to write your code, deploy it in real time, view logs, manage keys, and all of that. So we really just want to make it as simple and as simple and as easy as possible for you guys to write code and to actually prototype applications, build applications, or add functionality to your applications. And then finally, once your code is deployed, there's nothing for you to manage. So you can get off of work early, start the weekend early, and party time. So let's do, I'm going to do a quick demo for you guys and just show you how Webtask works. And hopefully I could prove to you that serverless is worth your time. If you haven't worked with serverless technologies before, that it might be worth checking out, even if it's just a hobby pet project. And usually, when you read a blog post or when you read a article or you watch a talk, when they give demos, it's usually the quintessential to-do app. Here's how we build a to-do app. Here's how you create a to-do. Here's how you check it off, and it does its job, but I feel it's kind of played out. So the demo that I'm going to show you guys is one that we built a couple weeks ago for a different talk, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so you guys can see. Can everyone see this screen okay? Okay, cool. So we created a Giphy battle system that uses the Giphy API to randomly generate a GIF that we're going to caption and send to our Webtask backend, store it in Webtask, and then we're going to allow you guys to come in and vote on, basically you'll see 2 random GIFs and you'll vote on the one that's that looks better or is funnier or is, whatever. So right here I'm on the create screen, and I just loaded up a random GIF, and let's caption it. Let's do me managing servers, because I'm not very good at it. So if I click create, it's gonna create a GIF, and it's gonna give me another one to create. And if I go to the battle screen right now, and I don't know if you guys have worked with the Giphy API before, they have these filters where you can restrict the GIFs to PG, PG-13. And I set it to PG-13, but sometimes you will get some very random GIFs that may be a little bit inappropriate. So I apologize, I don't have control over it. So if we click the battle, so now I've loaded 2 random GIFs from my Webtask, and I can vote on either one. And I like the when the live demo fails, so I'll go with that one. Vote on it, and it's gonna refresh it again and give me 2 new GIFs to vote on. So that's basically how our application works. Let me show you the code behind it. And this is a Angular 4.x application that we built, and we'll add some functionality to it. We don't have a working leaderboard, so we'll build that in Webtask. So let me load up the Webtask editor here, and here's the entirety of my application. It's just one file that has all of the different, it's an Express application that has a couple of different endpoints, and I could have written each one of these endpoints as a separate web task if I wanted to, but just for demo purposes, I decided to put everything in one file just to make it easier to see what's going on. And as you guys can see at the top here, importing a couple libraries that, you don't have to do npm install. We kind of already do that for you. So you just request the libraries you want to bring in, and which ones you want to work with. So here I'm, bringing in Express, the body parser, and the request library, so I can talk to the Giphy API. On this first request here, this is our random endpoint that gets us a random GIF when we click here on the create. And we have a little button here that's going to refresh and give us a random GIF. So it's going to call that endpoint every time we click it. So let's see if we get some fun GIFs. Yeah, pretty good. So that works. And then we have a post endpoint. And when this endpoint is hit, what we're going to do is we're going to take a GIF URL and a caption that the user creates, and we're going to save it in Auth0 or Webtask's storage. So another thing that we added with Webtask is each Webtask gets 500 kilobytes of in-memory storage that you can use to save some data. And you shouldn't put real production data that you really care about in here. But for demo purposes, I figure if we lose a couple GIFs, it's going to be okay. We can talk to external databases if we wanted to store this in Mongo or Postgres. So we absolutely could have. But just for demo purposes, I just used the built-in Webtask storage. So we have the endpoint that lets us create a GIF for battling, an endpoint for voting. So that you saw that on the vote screen where you see 2 GIFs and you have the vote button. So this covers that functionality. And then finally, we have the battle endpoint that goes through the array of GIFs that were saved in the storage and gets 2 random ones and displays them to the user. And then I have this shuffle array function that kind of looks at the array and kind of shuffles it and makes sure that we never get 2 of the same GIFs. But one thing that we are missing now is the leaderboard. So if we click on the leaderboard, nothing loads. I already did add the code for the leaderboard right here. So my leaderboard component is, we have all of the markup for it. We're making a call to the Webtask endpoint, to the leaderboard endpoint, but we don't have a leaderboard endpoint created. So, this call gets made, and I can show you guys. I'm making the call to Webtask, to the GIF battle Webtask, and the leaderboard endpoint, but we don't have an endpoint for that. So we just get an error message and nothing really works. So let's go ahead and create that endpoint. We'll do a little bit of live coding. We won't go too much into it. But let's just write it here, and it's just going to be a simple GET request, written again with Express, and I'll show you guys how it looks like. So it's app.get, and the endpoint is leaderboard, board, and then we're going to get a request and response. So just if you guys have ever worked with Express, this should be pretty bare bones basic stuff, and then we're going into Webtask storage, get, and I'm using a ES6 syntax here. And then what we're going to do is, once we make this get call to the Webtask storage, it's going to give us everything that we have stored. And right now it's just a single array that has a series of objects that contain a GIF ID, the number of votes that the GIF has received, and the GIF URL from Giphy. So let's sort that. We'll do A, B. And we're going to sort it by votes. So the GIF that has the most votes is going to be at the top. The GIF that has the least votes is going to be at the bottom. So B votes minus A votes. That's going to do our sorting. And then we're just going to response that or send that back in JSON format. And I can copy this URL here. I don't know if you guys can see it at the bottom. And actually test. So I just wrote this code right now, clicked save, and my application was refreshed, redeployed, and now this endpoint works. So I don't have to, redeploy. I don't have to, worry about was the build successful. I'm going to hope that it is. So I'm going to copy the endpoint and just open up a new browser tab and go to the leaderboard endpoint. Oh, not leaderboard, leaderboard, and there we go. We get an array that has all of our GIFs. But anyway, so now if we go back into our application, into our leaderboard, I'm going to refresh it. And now our leaderboard works. We have the top GIF with 29 votes at the top. And then it just goes down. And some of these GIFs are better than others. But basically, we were able to prototype an application essentially in real time, have a real working endpoint that anybody, with online access could hit. So we don't want just anybody creating GIFs and captions because they're probably going to put some spammy or inappropriate stuff on there. So we're going to limit that. And to do that, I'm going to go into the Auth0 management dashboard, and we're actually going to secure this application with JSON Web Tokens using Auth0's API authentication framework. So I've actually already created an API called GIF Battle for our application, and we can see it here. Basically, we have an identifier saying that it's a GIF battle. It's an API that we're protecting. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to install it on our backend in our Webtask. We're going to have this middleware that's going to check and make sure that the user that's trying to create a GIF is authenticated, has a valid access token. And if they don't, we're going to tell them, no, you can't do this. You need to be logged in. So to protect our backend, I can actually just look at the quick start here. And I'm just going to copy this middleware, or we'll go real quick, and I'll walk through it. But I'll just copy it. We'll install it up here, right under our Express application. And for this to work, we need to bring in the JSON Web Token JWT, the JSON Web Token library, which is open sourced, and I think Auth0 actually maintains this library. So it implements the JSON Web Token standard, allows you to validate, get tokens, validate them, create JSON Web Tokens. Does a lot of fun stuff like that. And then we have the JWKS library, JKS RSA. And basically what this library does, it's the JSON key, I forget what it stands for, or JSON Web Key Store. Yep. And we're pulling in the RSA version. So we're going to do a RS-256 algorithm for our token security. So we're going to encrypt the token with RS-256. Auth0, when they generate the token, they're going to sign it with a private key. We have the public key here that we're going to pull it from this well-known URL, and that's going to allow us to validate that the token that the user sends to our backend is actually a valid token that was generated by somebody that we trust. So that's this code here. It's just a middleware. So any endpoint that we want to protect, we could just add this middleware to. So just to show you guys, because the creation request is a post request, I'm just going to add the middleware to this random GIF just to show you that it works. And since I don't care about my application building or rebuilding, it's already done. I can undo it really quick. So I added this JWT check middleware to the random endpoint now. So now when I try to access it, I'm actually going to get an error message. And I'll show you that. So if we try to hit the random endpoint now, oh, whoops. So, okay. So now we get a different error, the error that we were hoping for. And the error says that no authorization token was found, basically meaning that when we hit the random endpoint, trying to get a random GIF from Giphy, we first went through the JWT check middleware, and it said, hey, do you have an access token? We obviously didn't, so our application failed. And we short-circuited and said, there's no authorization token found, so you're kind of hosed. So to get an authorization token, we're actually going to need to log in first. So let's do that by going into our Angular application here, and I already have the authentication service built, and I'll walk you guys through it real quick. It's basically we're using the Auth0.js library that's basically a wrapper around our RESTful API that's going to allow you to log in, allow you to authorize users, request tokens, do a lot of other management stuff. But basically we're using it to create a new web authentication, and just passing in my client ID, my credentials, and which API I want to authenticate to. And in this case, it's GIF Battles, which is the API that I talked to you guys about earlier. And then we just have a couple of methods based on this Auth0 web authentication. So we have a login method that's going to allow our user to log in. We have this handle authentication kind of global helper, and what this is going to do, I put this in the main app component of the Angular application. So this is going to run on every page refresh, and it's going to look at the URL and see if there's an access token in there, or see if we're coming back from a callback from Auth0, and if so, it's going to try to get the access token, the ID token, and all of that user information and store it in local storage. So that's where this set session method comes in. It basically gets the access token, ID token, and the expiration, and stores them in local storage. And then we also have a logout function that's going to log you out on the front end side of things. And then finally, we have a helper function called isAuthenticated that's just going to check in local storage to see if the expires at value is less than the current time. And if it is, we're going to assume that the user is logged out and log them out. If not, then we can assume that the user is successfully logged in. So let's go into our header here. And I'll actually have this commented out. So I already have the UI created to display the login and logout buttons. And they are both using the auth service that I just showed you guys. Where was it? So we have the logout function and the login function. And that maps right here. So if the user is, so we're doing an ngIf to see if the user is authenticated. If they're not authenticated, we're going to show them the login button. If they are authenticated, we're going to show them the logout button. So now that that's working, let's go back to our application, which is right here. And since I'm not authenticated, I just see the login button. And when I click it, it's going to redirect me to the Auth0 hosted login page where I'm going to enter my credentials and log in. So I hope this works, fingers crossed. Yep, great. So now I've been redirected to Auth0, and the only social login provider that I have set up right now is GitHub. If I wanted to change that, I could actually just go into my clients here, and I think it's called default app connections, and turn on which providers I want my users to be able to log in. So, you know, I had GitHub enabled. I can enable, you know, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, and even a database connection, say custom DB. So if I go back into my application and refresh now, sometimes it takes it a second to propagate properly. But when I click login now, I should get well, let's see. Might need to give it a second or two. Okay, I'll come back to that. But essentially, I've enabled all of the other connections. So when we come back to log in, we'll have a lot more options for logging in. But for right now, I'm just going to log in with my GitHub account. And now I know that I'm logged in because I have a logout button instead of a login button. And if I check my local storage, let's go in here, application, local storage. I see that I have an access token property, an ID token property, and an expires at Unix timestamp. And I can actually look at this JSON web token. I could go to JWT.io, decode it, and see what's in it. And let's just make sure that that's me who logged in. And yeah, so I see some information about my login. I see that I was logged in from my Autobot Auth0 account. I have my expiration time, when my token was issued, when it expires, and just a few other pieces of information. But I can't validate this token because I don't have the Auth0 private key. So now that I'm logged in, I should be able to go and create a GIF. Well, before I could create it anyway because we didn't add the JSON Web Token check middleware to our create endpoint. So let's do that first. We'll go here in the post. We'll add JWT check. So now if I'm not logged in, I shouldn't be able to create a new GIF or a new GIF for battling. So let me refresh the page. Oh, this is perfect. Okay, so I could actually I forgot to turn the middleware off on the random endpoint, so I can't even see a random GIF because it's not returned. So let's turn that off. Our application instantly rebuilds. We're back to running, no errors this time, and we get a GIF. So now I should be able to caption it and create a new GIF. But let's see if this works. So I'll say good drink. I don't know. We'll click create, and we're actually going to get an error because even though we are authenticated on the front end, this screen is not going to refresh if I inspect the application. I'm actually going to get an unauthorized. And the reason for this is, yes, I'm logged in, and yes, I do have a valid access token, but I didn't send it with my request. So I have it in my application. My backend node understands that it's expecting an access token, but I'm not sending one with this request. If I look at the network here, I'll just try to send it again. I had this code, I should have deleted this code earlier, but essentially for that save endpoint, I have to append the authorization access token to my request when I send it to the Webtask backend. Otherwise, Webtask doesn't know anything about my front-end application, doesn't really care about it. I have to tell it that, hey, I have a valid access token, authenticate me properly. And this was an error in my code. And so we'll add bearer. And then we'll append that token. So without it, we wouldn't be able to make a valid request. So let's see if this works now. Where are we? Okay. And So let's refresh the page. Party time. And something failed. All right, let me do this. I'm going to log out. I'm going to delete all of these. Just make sure my local storage is clean. Log in again. And now I have all of the various options that I enabled earlier. So this time, let's log in with Google. So I'll do that. I'll Autobot tenant, yes. So we want that. Should be able to create a GIF now. It works. Uh-oh. It doesn't work. And why doesn't it work? I will debug this, and I'll post the full demo code on the meetup page and walk you guys through what I find.
Thank you, Otto.
Thank you.